Okay. So today we are looking at how the research methodology is supposed to be written, especially for your research proposals and also for your research reports. Okay. So we're going to look at the considerations in writing your research methodology. We're also going to look at the difference between research methods and research methodology. And then we also look at the key things that you really need to have in your chapter for research methodology. So those are the things that we are supposed to be covering. And it's supposed to be a very short session because the key things that you're supposed to grasp are actually not many. So that means that it shouldn't be a long session. So usually writing the research methodology is time consuming, reason being that it takes a lot of effort. You ask yourself questions and then you answer those questions. Uh, so that means that you have a lot of thinking to do on why you're doing things the way you are doing them, or the way you're planning to do them. So that means that there is a lot of cognitive work that goes into that. So that means that writing a research methodology is not about saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. You need to give the reasoning behind everything that you're going to do. Why? Because you have a lot of options to choose from. Okay. If we talk about research designs, we have several research design approaches. We have several ways of collecting data. We have several ways of analyzing data. You have a lot of things that you actually have to choose from. So that means that such decisions require a lot of thinking, and that's why it is often challenging and time consuming. Okay? It defines the philosophical foundation behind the chosen methods. The meaning of this is that for everything that you're going to decide to do in your research report or in your research writing or in your research project, you have to give a justification, a sound justification for why you're doing things the way you're doing them. And that sound justification can be derived from your philosophical approach that you're actually using to conduct this research. Okay, we looked at the different philosophical approaches in research. So you need to choose: is it interpretative research? Is it positivist research? What is it? What are you basing on to conduct your research? Okay, and then the third point, which is that justification is key. That if you're saying that this research is going to be qualitative research, why is it qualitative? If you're going to use a questionnaire, why are you choosing a questionnaire? For example, there are things that actually can apply where a questionnaire can apply. You can have, for example, a checklist. Why are you choosing a checklist over a questionnaire? Or why are you choosing a questionnaire over a checklist? Okay. Why are you not using, for example, an interview guide over other methods? So that means that if you choose anything that you're going to choose, you need to give a justification. And that justification is not only about your opinions. That justification should come from logical reasoning, or what we are terming as academic reasoning here. Okay, so rationale is very important. Justification for everything that you're doing is very, very important. You don't just put or throw in different techniques or different strategies that you're going to use for your research. These strategies, techniques, or even tools or methods, whatever you can call them, should fit in well, into your whole research project. That means that you can't say, for example, that you're going to conduct a qualitative study, and then your data analysis, you say that data will be analyzed using, let us say, Excel. How? Qualitative, qualitative study and then Excel, they don't match. Okay, so that's what we mean by alignment. Everything needs to align. Everything needs to fit neatly into your research project. Okay, we need to be detailed enough. Detailed enough meaning that we need to provide that information that any other researcher can actually follow and reproduce the same kind of results as you. Okay, this is very important in the scientific work, that we clearly explain what we did. What did we do? What did we measure? We measured with what? Okay, those clear descriptions of every detail that we actually conducted, such that the person who is going to read your work and wants to reproduce the same kind of research, they should be able to do that based on the information that you are providing them. Okay, so if you are telling people that you measured people's blood pressure, okay, you need to tell us which machine did you use. Did you use a digital BP machine? Did you use a manual BP machine? Such that the person actually knows that if I'm going to reproduce this same kind of results, I need to use a manual BP machine or a digital blood pressure machine. So that means that's the necessary details are important. And the word there is the necessary details. Sometimes you have someone who is focusing on details that are not necessary and leaving out the details that are actually very necessary. So that is very key. And then the last point here is that you use an academic tone. An academic tone. This is part of what we call academic writing. And academic writing has its norms. We shall look at the different, what do you use an active voice? Do you use a passive tone? What do we have to use? Okay. But generally, academic writing is typically very professional. It's concise. You basically describe what you did and how you did it. Okay. And in most cases, in an active tone or active voice. So why do we write the methodology? Some of the reasons, actually, I've already mentioned them, which is that the research methodology gives us what we are calling here the blueprint for how the research will be conducted or how the research was conducted. Because of course you need to have the methodology chapter in your proposal. You also have your methodology chapter in your research report. Okay, in your research proposal, you're talking about how the study will be conducted. In your research report, you report what your study did. How was your study conducted? Okay, so the blueprint is that it has the details of how everything was actually done. And we look at your research methodology and understand everything, how everything was connected to the other. Okay, so it is very important that the research methodology is actually well looked at by your supervisor and approved, such that when you go into data collection, you are collecting what you are set out to collect. If the research methodology is not looked at critically, you will end up with the data that does not align very well with your research. Okay, and that means that you actually may end up with what I can term as illogical research, or findings that are not really very relevant. So that means that it is very, very key for you to be able to get that approval for your research report before you start the data collection. Okay? The research methodology is not written in isolation. The meaning of that is that it is actually based, or it is actually grounded on the research literature review. Actually, some of the decisions that you will make in your research, most of the decisions that you will make during your research methodology writing process is that you refer to what you had obtained during your literature review. So your literature review informs you on the different techniques that you can actually apply, and you actually get the justification from some of the justifications from the literature review. Okay, so that means that the methodology is actually linked. It is linked to the literature review, it's linked to the research objectives, and is linked to the research hypothesis, and then the research question. So it is not in isolation, it is linked up. What are the key things that you need to include in your research methodology? The rule is, or the broader statement that guides you on what to include in your research statement, research chapter. That statement is, what did you do? How did you do it? Where and when? And then the rationale, which is the why part. Okay? What did you do? How did you do it? Why did you do it the way you did it? Okay? Where? Okay? And then when? So that's it. If you write your research methodology and it doesn't have those things, it means you have not written a very good research methodology chapter. So now let us be more technical. You need to have the research design. That is usually the first thing that you need to tell us. Okay? You need to start with the research design. Don't start with the research location or target population. That when we start with those things, it means that your work is not actually logical. Your work is not logical if you start with anything apart from the research design, because the research design gives us an insight onto how the other things are going to progress. So that's why we start with the research design. So you outline the research design, and because it sets up the stage, the reader is going to know the things that you're going to be writing below. Okay, you tell us about the location, and still for everything there is justification. You justify why you are using a particular research design, and then when you talk about location, you still need to justify. Usually, location is together with what we call setting. So some research reports, you will see location and context, or location and setting. These are all the same things. What do they refer to here? Is that sometimes the research findings make a lot of meaning if there is a clear description of how, where this research was actually conducted, especially the where part. If you say this study was conducted in Malakal in South Sudan, what is Malakal in South Sudan? You need to tell us that. You need to tell us that it is one of the capitals of one of the states in South Sudan. So someone gets a picture of what you're talking about. Okay? If you're talking about a study that is conducted at Juba Teaching Hospital. The context there, or the setting there, is that Juba Teaching Hospital is actually a national referral hospital for the country, South Sudan, and it is located in the capital, Juba. That is context. That context is very important because it helps in answering some of the questions that can come up later. Okay, so the target population, who is going to be studied, or what is being studied, and this should be linked to the research design or location. Sampling procedure, don't only mention that you did, that it was convenient sampling. Don't only mention that it was purposive sampling. Don't only mention that. If you're going to say it was, let us say, purposive sampling method was used, how did you implement that purposive sampling method? That is very important. If you say that it was a simple random sampling method, how did you achieve that? Because there are different ways of achieving randomness. Okay, so if you don't clearly describe how you achieved that randomness, then you have not done the scientific world justice. Okay, so you need to clearly describe the sampling procedures step by step. Okay, and then give a justification for why you chose that type of sampling method. Research tools. Research tools, we are talking about the whether it is a questionnaire, whether it is a well-validated tool for measuring something. You need to describe that tool. Are you using a tool that is already developed, or did you develop your own tool? Why haven't you used the tools that are already available if they're universally used? Or if you're talking about a tool that is universally used and you modified it, can you tell us that I adopted the pain scale tool because it is universally used and it is very easy to apply in these situations? Okay, you give out that the necessary details about the tools that you're going to use. Even sometimes, for example, if you're let us say measuring people's blood pressure, like I said, if you're taking MUAC, if you're the one doing the MUAC reading, that is mid upper arm circumference, you need to tell us which MUAC did you use, why did you use it. The issues that come with the improper description of the things that you are going to use in your research work, those things include issues of reliability, issues of validity of your data collection tools. So that's why that description is very, very important. Okay, reliability of the instrument is basically what I've just described. Include that if for example, if there is a tendency that different people can come up with different measurements of perhaps the same parameter or maybe the same individual, then we are going to say that that tool is not reliable. So how are you going to address that? Because we are very certain that we also have tools that are not actually very reliable. Okay, where you have variation, but how are you going to ensure that that variation is actually not there, such that you have consistent data? Okay, so reliability and validity usually move hand in hand. So you need to know, for your research project, you need to know what are the things that are going to cause reliability problems, what are the things that are going to cause validity problems. You need to read about these two terms. We have internal validity, external validity. How do you minimize issues to do with invalidity in your research? Okay. Describing the data collection procedures. Okay. If you're going to meet, let us say, you're going to meet school-going children, how did you approach them? In what kind of setting did you actually interview them, if indeed you interviewed them? These details are very important. What tools did you use in such interviews? Okay, and why did you actually use those tools? Though that information is very key. Data analysis approaches should be well explained. Data analysis procedures. Why? Still, for the reason that you want the other person who is reading your work, if they want to carry out the same kind of research like you, they should be able to follow it to the dot. So that is very, very important too. Okay? So of course we know that qualitative data collection, analysis, and then quantitative data analysis, they use different approaches. Okay, so you need to know how qualitative data is analyzed and how quantitative data is analyzed. Okay, know the difference between research methods and research methodologies, why and how given research methods have been chosen. What is behind what we see? What is behind what we see? Okay, what we see is what you're doing is what we call research methods. But the research methodology is what is below what you're doing. Okay, so how and why? If you're going to use, let us say, critical research approach in your research, there should be justification for why the critical research approach is actually what is best. Perhaps because you're addressing a social issue where you have power dynamics influencing it, and that therefore justifies why you need to look at this research problem using the critical research approach. Okay, so the critical research or feminist research approach becomes the methodology behind it. It informs everything that you're going to do, including the way you're going to do you're going to frame the questions and every other processes that you're going to do. So the processes, the key details, the steps are the ones that we call the methods. We can call them the operational details, like, okay, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But what informs that decision of what you're going to do is what we call research methodology. Okay, so for research methods, you're interested in doing what ought to be done and how. But the other research methodology is about what backs up the decisions that you have chosen. Okay, so the first step, usually when you're reading any research report, they will tell you straightforward that this research is a cross-sectional study. This research was a qualitative. That first statement basically gives you the approach that was used. What was that research? That first statement is always like that. That is what you need to decide first. Okay, so that means that your research methodology starts by outlining whether your study is actually qualitative or quantitative, or is it mixed methods research. Okay, so sometimes it is not a must that you actually have to use those terms. Sometimes you go straight to the point and say this was a case study. So when you say this was a case study, the person who is reading understands that case studies are usually qualitative in nature. If you go straight and say this is a cross-sectional study, in most cases, or this is a prevalence study, or this is a cross-sectional study, or this is whatever you can call it, someone will know that that is actually a quantitative research study. Okay, so make that decision quite fast in writing your methodology. So that means that deciding on what approach you're going to take is very important because it informs you of everything. It's a reflection of the questions, the research questions, the research objectives that you actually have in your study. So that means that it is still tied up to the other sections of the research proposal. Okay, how do you decide the type of research approach or design that you're going to use? Read widely and see, okay, the topics, the different research studies that I've looked at in this topic, where do they fall? The people have been using, other researchers have been using what approaches? Okay, if you're examining practices of exclusive breastfeeding, that is what you're looking at. What are the other people? How are the other people looking at this problem? Okay, because that can inform you of whether most of the people are using qualitative or quantitative. But again, it doesn't mean that you actually have to follow strictly what the other people are doing. Okay, one of the points you can actually say is that most people have been using this approach, but this approach is not very suitable for examining this question because of ABCD. So you decide to go the other way or the other direction. Though most of the sources in the literature are pointing you to another direction. So that's very important. Every research design has limitations. So that means that in your decision to choose which research method to use, you need to take into consideration the fact that you can have the variations in terms of limitations and the strength. Of course, you don't want to conduct research that is actually weak, research that is not vigorous. That's what we mean there. Okay, so that means that proper justification for the chosen research approach is very important because it sets the ground for how you're going to look at the other sections of the research methodology. So the decisions on choosing the right research design is very, very important. And your research design sets the ground for everything that you're going to do. That's one. But always think about the fact that you're choosing one method or one research design and leaving the other. Why do you make that decision? Do you have a justification, a proper academic justification for what you're choosing? Okay. Still, literature review is very important, and that research designs should suit well with the other sections of the research, the research hypothesis, research questions, research objectives, and other parts. Okay? And like I said earlier on, if you choose the right research design, it means you're going to know how you're going to collect data, how you're going to analyze the data, and you actually have a good understanding of even the variables that you're going to include, including how you're going to analyze data collection procedures and analysis. You need to state what is very important. Are you the one going to collect data, or you're going to use already collected data? Why are you going to use already collected data and not your own data, primary data? If you collect your own data, that is primary data. If you're going to use data that is collected by another person or that has been collected by another person, then that is secondary data. Okay, or data that was collected for another research or for another purpose. Okay, is that data definitely qualitative or quantitative? If you say that your data, your research design is going to be qualitative, it means that you're going to know that you're going to collect qualitative data. That's obvious. But of course, the methods of how you're going to collect this qualitative data or quantitative data will actually also be different. Ethical considerations is one of the sections that you include in your research methodology chapter. How did you ensure confidentiality? How did you ensure privacy? How did you ensure that you did not harm people? What approvals did you get? What are the harms that you anticipated, and how did you address them? All that, all the even the consent form. Okay, you have a proper consent form that has all the elements of ethical principles. All the ethical principles of research should be there. So your ethical considerations should be there. Okay, research limitations is also something that you need to put. Avoid any bulleting. I've seen people who are writing proposals with bullets. Yeah? We have a format for writing proposals or even writing research reports. There is no need for you to write bullets. No, we don't write like that. When you write a limitation, you say, for example, if this research study included only 50 students, if you are investigating, if your research problem is about investigating a particular phenomena among students, and your point, you're saying that you only had 50 students to interview, and perhaps this did not give you what you ought to have gotten. You need to also elaborate on what are the things that you did to make sure that this limitation does not make your research actually useless. Because if you have overwhelming weaknesses in your research or limitations of your research, then you in a way make people to weigh your research and say this is not rigorous research. So for every limitation, acknowledge the weaknesses, yes, but what did you do to make sure that you improve the study altogether? Okay. Earlier on, I talked about the tone that you use. It is an academic tone. When writing the research methodology chapter, no, are you writing a proposal? If it is a proposal, it is in future tense. If it is the report, it is in past tense. Okay? Now, the second thing is that you should write your methodology chapter in what we call the active voice. Okay? Active voice. We talked about this earlier on. Clear, concise, non-repetitive writing is what is actually required. That means that you need to structure your wordings very, very clearly. And therefore, if you're reading in a research report or research article, please pay attention to how people are writing their things. Okay? Okay, the things that you really need to avoid, including unnecessary details and overcomplicating things where there is no need. 2, explaining the basic things. So that means that avoid what I earlier on called unnecessary details. Focus on what is very, very important and what can allow someone else to reproduce or to conduct the same study like you conducted. Okay? If you're going to follow procedures that are not very common, the one we are terming as unconventional methods, we are saying that please justify for why you're choosing those methods. It's not a must that you should do what other people have been doing. That's not how it is. But if you're deciding to do what other people have not been doing, then please make sure that you explain and justify why you're doing it that way. Okay, because that is also very important in research. Research becomes boring if people do the same thing over and over again. There could be nothing new that is going to come up. And also, if you read the history of research, you realize that some of the research techniques are actually new. That means that people are addressing problems in a different way. So it is not always that you should do things in the same manner always and always. Okay, so that basically marks the end of this presentation. The hallmark is that write neatly, concise, making sure that you include all the necessary details, know the tense that you have to include. Always provide justification for everything that you're writing. Thank you.